Welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Today we have Tanya Paulette, and she's been with UTRGV Students Accessibility Services since 2014, where she currently serves as the director. Ms. Paulette is working with persons with disability for over 20 years, with 14 of those years in public schools, where she has her roles included educational practices, coordinator of autism services, and licensed specialist in school psychology. She was also a licensed professional counselor and is currently pursuing a doctorate in educational technology.
Leadership. Educational leadership. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to make that clear. Thank you. I wouldn't say that I'm a techie, but I'm comfortable with technology, but to get a doctorate in it would be something completely different. So, well, I'm glad you're here today. This shows the interest in the topic. So, accommodations, accessibility, and student success. Of course, all of those things are very near and dear to my heart and what we do in our office with Student Accessibility Services. But as you know, we have a very brief time together today. So 40 minutes, I'm going to cover a lot, and then there'll be time for questions and answers. But of course, if you have questions that need to extend beyond today's session, feel free to touch base with me after today's group, and then we'll exchange information so that we can schedule something. So the session description gives you the highlight of what we'll be covering today. I really want to focus on just giving you an overview and an understanding of the importance and the details and the processes related to accessibility and especially accommodations here at the university, and particularly in online courses. So I have to give you a little background. I always feel this is part of my responsibility, is that under the ADA, public entities, including UTRGV, universities, public higher education institutions, are required under the ADA to provide services and support students with disabilities, and ensuring that they are not discriminated against based solely on their disability. So there are anti-discrimination laws in place which protect students with disabilities from being denied equal access to academic material, and that of course includes online courses. So equal access is really the two words I think that relate most to what Student Accessibility Services does and supports. We have to ensure that our students with disabilities do have that equal access, and of course if those students have any issues and feel like maybe they are not receiving equal access, that's another role of our office. I want to definitely point out though, and I always try to tell faculty, that we are not as a university trying to change the curriculum requirements. We do not fundamentally alter any of those requirements, but really what accommodations do and accessibility supports, they're there to provide reasonable flexibility. And we're going to be getting into a little bit of what that is. Some of that has to do with accommodations, but some of it also has to do with how you design your courses to make sure that they're flexible and more accessible to a wide range of students. And I just also wanted to point out that, as you can see in our HOP, if you ever want to go read it in detail, there is a statement there that supports the university's responsibility to make sure that our students have equal opportunity for all members of our community to be able to engage in their educational and working environments. So of course that means students and employees. Our office just deals with student accessibility. Employee accessibility goes through our HR department. But that we're also complying with all state and federal laws and regulations for educational access and employment. So that's the legal part of it, and that's a little bit of your history too. So let's get to the definition of what a disability is. So ADA definition of disability: a physical or mental impairment substantially limiting one or more major life activities, and we'll talk about what that is, a record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. So major life activities, as you can see here, a lot of these things you probably already imagined what might fall under that category: walking, standing, sitting, lifting, bending, breathing, sleeping. But some of the major life activities that you may not have thought of are things like learning, reading, concentrating. There's a wide variety of disabilities, and we'll talk about that too, but any of those can affect any of these areas in multiple ways, and sometimes jointly. The other part of that definition is including major bodily functions. And I point these out really not to give you sort of medical information, but that you're aware that many of our students, especially those served through student accessibility services, do experience difficulties and challenges related to these types of conditions. As you might imagine, if a person has, let's say, some sort of bowel or bladder disorder, it will affect their ability to attend in class and pay attention, in other words. Sometimes it may even affect their attendance. They may have to take short, frequent breaks throughout the class because they need to step out, go to the restroom, take a break, whatever the case might be. Part of that process is what we go through in working with our students on an individual basis to determine what is needed for them in that classroom so that they do have that equal access to the course information and materials. Okay. So these are the categories of disabilities that we generally consider. Most of these you're probably familiar with, and we're going to talk a little bit about this last one, the invisible disabilities, because it's also referred to as hidden disabilities. I think that becomes a particular concern in online environments because you're not going to be seeing the students necessarily. You may not even have the opportunity to meet with them for office hours because that's usually done through emails online. But hidden disabilities is anything that's not readily apparent to an observer. So, for example, we've even had students tell us when they come to register with our office, I didn't realize these services were here because I thought it was just for students who use wheelchairs, or I thought it was just for people who couldn't walk, for example. Those are those more obvious, apparent disabilities, but in many of these different categories, you're going to be able to think about different conditions that would fall under that hidden disability. So, for example, a learning disorder, somebody who has difficulty with reading or dyslexia, written expression, math. Those things may not be readily apparent, but they may start to evidence themselves in some of the work that the student turns in. And this is in the case if a student has not disclosed their disability to you yet as the instructor. Another one might be traumatic brain injury. And we do have a number of students here at our university, and this is typical across the nation's universities, with these types of impairments. And again, that may not be readily apparent, but as you start to talk with a student, you may notice some differences in the way that they're processing information. It could even be evident in email communication that you're having with the student, or maybe on discussion boards in the online environment. But a lot of these different disabilities will have some crossover too. So what may be symptoms in one area could easily pop up as symptoms in another one. It just really depends on the particular diagnosis and the individualized symptoms for that student. I want to touch real quick too on other health impairment. This is a category that we use in identifying our students that is very broad. So for example, if you've ever worked in public schools, the other health impairment is also a very large category of disabilities there, because one of the diagnoses that falls under that is attention deficit disorder, or also attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADD, ADHD. And that's a very broad category too. Many of our students are diagnosed with that particular condition. Other things that would fall under that category though might be medical conditions. So everything from cancer, fibromyalgia, lupus, it's just a very, very large category. So it encompasses a lot of different conditions and disabilities. It would fall under that other health impairment, that's correct. So generally, your medical conditions would fall in there. Okay. So given that overview of disabilities, the one thing I thought was really important to talk about today is just learner variability. And I know this is really very broad in terms of the discussion of the specifics of the disabilities and their categories, but learner variability is the norm. And that's really the message I wanted to get across today. We know that learner variability is normal. There is no single way for everyone to learn and to process information. You and I are going to do things very differently when we're sitting in the classroom. I know for myself, I take copious notes. A person sitting next to me may have half a page and I have 6 pages. But that's because we learn differently. And I know this is not news to y'all. You see the differences in your students and probably in yourselves as well. But I think it's something for us to remember is that learner variability is the norm. The other thing is that it's systematic. And there's some research that I'll show you in a few minutes, some clips from that, some quotes to emphasize that. But like I said, it is the norm, it is not the exception. And many curricula will focus on the normal student, the average student, but research and our experiences also shows us that there is no such thing. So this is some of the research that I was taking a look at to support this information. As you can see, there is support for learner variability being developmental, systematic, and context dependent. But the good news is because we know it's systematic, we can plan for it. And so there's always that concern of, but does this mean I'm going to have to do extra work? I've got so much on my plate. I've got plenty to do. And we all do. It's very understandable. But the idea is that if you know it's systematic and you can plan for it in advance, if you can do it in advance of your course design as you're thinking about setting it up, it's ideal because not only does it prepare the opportunities for a wide variety of students to be able to learn effectively, but it may eliminate the need for some accommodations. Not all, but some. And the idea too here is that it saves the instructor time because then you're not waiting to see how each individual student will perform and consider that in terms of how you provide your course material. So there will always be a need for differentiating instruction. So this brings me to Universal Design for Learning. Just a show of hands, who's heard the term? Universal Design for Learning, UDL, okay. Also, I would be curious to see how many of you have implemented UDL principles and strategies in your classrooms. Show of hands. So we have 1 or 2, and that's okay. That's why I want to introduce this again today. Even though you're familiar with it, I really want to try to emphasize how important it is for that broad spectrum of students. So it is a curriculum design framework guiding educators, planning for that systematic learner variability. And the key word that also stands out to me is flexible. It is flexible design of your learning goals, materials, methods, and assessments. So everything in your course design. And yes, initially it was designed and created to help students with disabilities, but what has been found repeatedly is that when it is implemented, it assists students with all types of special needs and talents, and it helps them be effective learners. And the other thing that's good to know about UDL is that it does reduce barriers to learning. This is a good resource on UDL if you're interested in pursuing more information. There are some resources listed at the end of the handout. This is one of the websites, and there's a couple of others, even with examples of faculty who are implementing UDL in their particular courses. And we'll get to that slide in a minute. We'll talk about that. So as I said, it does provide a framework. It's a blueprint for creating instructional goals, methods, materials, assessments, working for everyone. The key here is that it's not a one-size-fits-all. It is very flexible. It is customizable and adjustable, which addresses individual needs. The other thing that's really nice about it, though, is that it encourages student engagement. And I think that's really important as we look at our students being connected not only to their classmates, their peers, those in their cohorts, but also here to the university. Any way that we can increase student connectedness and a feeling of belonging. I belong here. I exist in this academic program. I exist and am important and valued in this university. To me, that's another benefit. So these are the general UDL components and some strategies that can be considered. And I'm sorry, I realize that some of y'all don't have handouts yet. Thank you. Providing multiple means of engagement. And of course, these are some of the examples. Service learning projects, group works, personal reflections and journaling, team competitions. And as you implement these types of strategies in your classroom, you may see which groups of students, which individual students perform better with one versus the other. Some people may be really great at those personal reflections and journaling, but they don't do so well in group work because maybe groups are uncomfortable for them. Maybe they have communication difficulties that creates a barrier for them sometimes in working in groups. And of course, it's going to be very specific to the individual student. But as you start implementing a variety, a flexible group of means of engagement, you'll be able to see which students are performing best. And then there may be one or two you come across that tends to be productive and effective for the wide variety of students. Another component of UDL is the multiple means of action expression, allowing students to express their knowledge in multiple means. So for example, maybe you typically assign an essay, and they do their research, and they create this wonderful essay, 10 pages, so many references that you've assigned. But not all students are going to perform well with that. Even though that may be something that's important for college students to know, you have to look at what you're really trying to test their knowledge on. And if that essay, if that paper is the best way to do it, that's appropriate. But I guess I'm just asking you to look at, is there another way? And is there another way that students can become engaged with that activity? So for example, maybe you ask students in lieu of doing a paper, or that could be one option, that they provide a video. So they may create a video either individually or in a group. And so that's one differential way to show their knowledge. Perhaps there's those weekly discussions posted in Blackboard. That could be another thing. Some of this starts to really make you look at how can I be creative so that my students can gain the most and the deepest level of learning from the material that I'm sharing, and keeping in mind that learner variability. And so then you have the multiple means of representation, and this is to support the processing of information. Using multiple forms of media, for example, videos and even simulations. Sometimes using your students, maybe have somebody create some sort of skit that they're going to use to demonstrate the material that you're trying to convey in the class. It doesn't necessarily have to take the place of the information you're conveying, but it can be in a supplement form to that. Lots of variations, lots of flexibility, and these are just a few ideas. So why is accessibility and UDL important at the university level? It's because of student success and retention, which is so important to us all the way from the time the student steps foot on the campus. But what I see is that it is intersecting with accessibility and UDL. So the framework of the courses being more flexible contributes to students' success because you're addressing that learner variability that we know now is normal and systematic. So it all fits together, it intersects. Post-secondary institutions are obligated to provide accessible learning materials and technologies, especially for students with disabilities. But with UDL, we're simply doing more than just providing for those students. We're providing for a wider range of students and in very accessible ways. Can you see if that link will work? I hope it will. I have a very short video.
Accessibility is one of the key foundational principles of universal design. It's a component of universal design, but it's not by itself universal design. First thing, or the way we sometimes phrase it, is that accessibility is essential but insufficient on its own to be universal design for learning. Accessibility is really captured in the first principle of UDL, multiple representations of information. And from an instructional perspective, it's a whole mantra: you can't reach them, you can't teach them. That information has to be accessible, presented in a variety of ways: audio, print, tactile, rapidly, by video, as many possible ways as there are. Surely, as UDL really expands beyond that, it talks about actual expression, how people exhibit mastery, how they express their achievement, how they can really articulate about what it is they know. And then the third principle is really thinking about engagement, how we engage learners to enforce and enhance their persistence in ways that really can support them in the face of challenges.
after watching the video and listening to what I've been discussing earlier, I'm just wondering if there's a change maybe in those of you who raised your hand earlier about I've implemented UDL strategies. After listening to the definition, are there more hands going up that, yes, I've implemented these things in my classroom? So I want to acknowledge that because sometimes we may not be familiar with this particular name of a concept, but I know that our faculty are doing these things. And so I think that's one reason I wanted to share this, is so that you also are aware that you're doing this, and now maybe it helps to understand some of the reasons why, and then also some of the research that's related to it. And just going, you don't have to go back, but just that last statement on that last slide, it's all about student success, and that's really what we're here for. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. Part of my requirement today was to talk about the UTRGV Accommodation Process. So I'm just going to kind of run through this, but of course if you have any questions, you can stop me or you can ask me after today when we have a few minutes. Ultimately, what's important at the university level is that students do self-identify with a disability. So generally, the public schools, there are laws and procedures in place where school officials are required that if they suspect a disability, then they will consider assessing that disability. Very different at the university level. So students have to inform us that they have a disability. When they disclose to a faculty member or staff or anyone else at the university, it is our responsibility as a member of this university community to refer them for services, and that's with Student Accessibility Services, which is my office. Just so you know, though, students with disabilities are not required to register with SAS. It is their choice. And so I'm going to get into this a little bit more in a few minutes, but just to have said that, I also want you to know that if they choose not to register with our office, they're also then not eligible for accommodations. So a student comes to you or emails or engages some way with you and says, you know, I have this disability, but I really don't want to register because I think I can do everything without registering for services and getting accommodations. So can you give me a little extra time just on this test? And I really encourage very strongly that you not do that, because those kinds of decisions really need to come through the SAS office. And part of the process that I'm going to share with you anyway is kind of how we go through that. There's a flow chart I'll show you in a second, and why we are the designated office at the institution to make those decisions, and the kinds of things that we do to support those decisions. So as I've noted here, do not provide accommodations unless they've been approved through our office. And the other thing that's very important to know, and this is on our accommodation letters too, is that accommodations are not retroactive. So that means from the day they are approved through our office, and the letter goes out to the student, and the letter goes out to the professors from our office, the accommodations that the student maybe had requested prior to that, they are not required to have been implemented. And I always have a however. If there's ever that situation and the student is saying, but now I have accommodations, I've registered with the office, and just last week I asked for some extra time on my test or my assignment, if you're not sure of what to do, and I really do encourage you to contact our office because we can help with that conversation and working with that student as well. So the accommodation process. As I mentioned, the student does self-identify, and it's to either our office or someone else at the university, and then they're referred back to our office. They will complete an intake packet with us. It's either online or at our office, and the student will schedule an interview with us. We ask for them to submit documentation of their disability. We will review that, and just so you know, here it says our SAS counselor will review that information, and the reason that is because the people employed in our office are professionals who are skilled with expertise in reviewing that type of information, and there needs to at least be one person in the office, and we have this multiple ways, for those individuals to have experience in evaluating disabilities and then understanding that type of report. So we've asked the student to submit documentation. They meet, they have their intake interview, they discuss the accommodations that are relevant to that particular student's disability, as well as the student's request. And this is called I just went blank, our discussion, our intake, and I'll come back to it in just a second. There's a term that's used for that. once we have this review done, then we have the review through our departmental review committee, which is what we call our DRC. We have this scheduled once a week, and there's folks from our department that sit on this committee, and there's lots of questioning that goes on, a lot of evaluation of those accommodations that have been recommended or even requested by the student, so that they are vetted out very carefully. Sometimes we have additional recommendations as part of that process, and sometimes we may not approve a particular request for an accommodation. It really depends on the justification that we have in order to move forward with those. So then the accommodation letter is created, and that's with the approved accommodations, and that is sent to the student and the professors, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. We do require the students to register with our office every semester, and that's very important for you to know. So when you get that accommodation letter, it will have the current semester at the top of that letter. And the term that I was looking for was interactive process. Yes?
Is there a scenario where a student that's not a student but a parent or guardian facilitate the contact?
Yes. There's always a way for students to connect with our office. We do have parents, especially for those students that are entering freshmen, and even those students dually enrolled, because those parents have many times been very involved with those students and their services provided through the schools up to that point of high school graduation. So sometimes parents will contact us and we'll schedule that initial appointment. Many times the parents will come in with those students. We always make sure to tell the parent, though, that everything at the university level is the student's responsibility. And of course, we like their support because we know that that helps move our students forward. But yes, any way that student gets to our office, we're happy about that. Helps the student too. Yes. Yes. That's a very good question. And I'm going to say no to that, but there's always the yes side. No, because we know that our students can change at any time. So for example, let's say a student comes in as an entering freshman and they present documentation that shows that they have dyslexia. What we don't know at that time is will there be other disabilities that come about in that student's 4 to 6 years in college. So for example, sometimes we'll have students that come in with a temporary condition, and we do provide temporary accommodations. It could be a student that has a skateboarding accident, steps off a curb, and then they break their leg, or they break their arm, their wrist. Lots of students at rec and engaging in kickboxing and things like that, they come in because now they can't take notes in class because their dominant hand is unable to work. So that's what happens with us, making sure that we always leave that door, that window open. We ask them to check in with us on a semester basis. That's really the purpose of having them register every semester. It gives them an opportunity to say, oh yeah, I've got something else that's going on with me. I was just diagnosed with this condition as well. Because the accommodations that are provided for, let's say, dyslexia, could be very different than those accommodations provided for somebody who has a broken wrist or who now has heavy medications because they were in a car accident and they're on lots of pain meds. So things happen in the course of every student semester, and having them register every semester helps them and helps us check in and to know if there's anything else that we need to be paying attention to support those students. Does that answer your question? So I think it's nice to think about students registering when they come in and they stay with us. But then the concern is, what if there are changes and they forget to tell us? They may be expecting their professors to accommodate them because they say, oh, I've already got accommodations. But really it's up to our office to determine what accommodations are appropriate for that given situation and that given condition. Yes?
Don't you have certain disabilities that are permanent?
Yes.
It makes no sense to have someone do that every semester when you know it's not going to change.
The disability itself, for example, dyslexia, you're right, that would not change. But other things change in a student's life. For example,
But everyone's treated the same, and you don't have temporary versus someone that, it's permanent?
Well, that was an example I gave earlier of the permanent and a temporary disability occurring with the same student. I can think of different scenarios where maybe a student came in with, let's just say, ADD, and then throughout the course of their college career, other conditions are diagnosed. Perhaps it's a mental health condition. Perhaps it's generalized anxiety disorder or major depression. Those kinds of things impact a student's learning and their access to the course information very differently than ADD or ADHD would. So that, again, is why, yes, those conditions may be permanent in some cases, but we also know that everybody has life changes. Things can impact us either on a longer-term basis or on a temporary basis, and that's also why it's important for us to stay in touch with our students. And I will add that many of our students come in fairly regularly to check in with us to say, I'm having great success in this, but I need a little help in this. Maybe I need to go to counseling now. We also use it as an opportunity to refer our students to other resources here at the university, as well as in the community. And it's just a connection point for our students as well. We'd like for them to self-advocate, but we also assist in advocating for them, so I think that's another reason we really want to stay connected. That's a good question, though. Mm-hmm.
For the student to go to your office and request that I do have a situation right now that this morning I received a letter. Halfway through the module, which is 7 weeks accelerated program, the student performing well for the whole year, and now she had this accommodation with the letter, and we have working in groups.
Okay.
So how can I I don't want to reply yet.
Yes.
I talked to your mom.
That's great.
She said, the person I talked to this morning, she
Yes.
said, well, you can temporarily accommodate or with individual activity, but for the group activity you can. And I don't feel comfortable.
Okay, so that's something you and I will talk about.
Okay.
Because as I said earlier, I understand that, and I understand your discomfort with that. As I said earlier, the intention of accommodations and what the services and supports we provide through student accessibility services is not to alter the curriculum. So let's say, and I don't know the background, there is a requirement for a student to engage in group work. So maybe we don't eliminate group work, but we may look at other ways to accommodate that particular student's needs at that time. And there's a wide variety of things we can consider, but that has also to do with the communication with the faculty members so that we're very aware of what the requirements are. So we will talk. Okay, yes. Okay, so I've got a little more and I know I'm running short. How much more time do I have? Okay. Let's get to the stuff about the issues. Okay, let's get to the issues about the online courses. So we talked earlier about those hidden disabilities. The research that I found also shows that online students often are hesitant, for whatever reason, to disclose their disabilities. And you would think, well, you're online, maybe they would be more comfortable, but that's actually not what I found. So as you can see here in this particular study, due to the impersonal nature of the online environment, students may be less likely to disclose. I didn't say that, the researcher said that. But I can see what they're talking about, because if you're not face-to-face, you're not connecting with that person weekly, several times a week, it could feel a little impersonal. The other thing is that graphics and visual media may not be accessible. That's also a concern, especially in text-heavy environments, and that is for those particular students with those disabilities that would be affected by that. The best practice recommendation that I have is to review your syllabus statement at the very first class with your students. Maybe in an online environment, if you're not doing that through video with your class, then make sure you have a way for students to acknowledge that they have reviewed that, the full syllabus, and perhaps even asking, if they have any questions. The idea is that we're not trying to recruit students with disabilities. We just want them to know what to do if they need supports and services. So some strategies for online courses. We've already talked about flexibility, choice of assignments, demonstrating the knowledge they've acquired. Also queuing important information on your website, and this could be in Blackboard, to meet the needs of the students depending on their needs. And this gives you an example of how you might do something like that, introducing a website, including a written explanation of that particular site's layout, as well as a video or audio narration, where it's not just the student reading the information. And then incorporating asynchronous discussion boards, and the reason for that is that timing is not a factor. Thinking about the timing of assignments, when they're open, when they're closed, those kinds of things can allow for greater flexibility. And again, what is it that you're trying to assess? You're trying to assess their knowledge. That's great. If you need them to provide their knowledge in a very quick way, that's something that's very different. You would have less flexibility with the timing. So it really depends on what you're trying to evaluate. Some other thoughts: ensure that your websites and resources are utilized with assistive technology. Some of the things that come into play here are alternate keyboards, text-to-speech software, screen magnifiers. These are things that our students utilize, especially in the online environment. If students ever say, I'm not able to access this video or this material or this document, and you're unsure about how to proceed with that, you can certainly contact us, and also COLT. They're a wonderful resource, and we've worked together with some students to make sure we've been able to overcome some of those challenges in that online environment related to technology. Offer alternative media. In this case, they're suggesting audio tape books, braille printouts, oral and written captions. And with that said, I don't want to let you go away thinking that that is your responsibility alone. Because if it's a student that's registered with our office, we do provide the alternate format for that student. We work with the faculty to make sure that we have that information in advance time so the student would have that equal access as other students would. But we'll take care of a lot of that alternate format for you. So the challenge, as I mentioned, is when the technology conflicts with our online platforms. And in this case, it might be Blackboard. We've had some issues in the past with Lockdown Browser. We've been able to work around that, though. So if you encounter any of those problems where a student is telling you they cannot access information, course material, tests, then please reach out to COLT first, and then our office. Like I said, we work together very well. Some of the kinds of technology you may hear about or see or hear students using is for students who are hard of hearing. You may hear of CART, that's Communication Access Real-Time Translation. That's when a student is registered with our office and we provide the service to them, generally because they're hard of hearing, and it's sort of the live captioning that'll go across their screen so that they can see what's being said instead of trying to listen to it. Generally, that's not as much of an issue in an online environment because those students will have additional ways to increase the volume. But for some of those students, that's not a possibility. It doesn't work effectively. Caption videos, very important. COLT's doing a great job with that, I know. If a student is deaf and they need a sign language interpreter in the online environment, we have to determine how to do that in a live streamed way so that they have that access. So you can see some other things here as far as technology that our students would use. I'm being told I have to wrap it up. Lots of strategies here. I had some scenarios, but we can talk about those individually if this sounds familiar to you or an experience you've had. And then I just wanted to point out at the back of the handout, there are those resources. Some of the resources, of course, is our office here at the university and also in Brownsville, and our website. We have a lot of information listed on the website. We have an FAQ, and we also have an accommodations glossary. We've just added that this past semester, so hopefully you'll find those helpful. Any questions? How many? Okay, good. Okay. 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 I wanted you to answer it. And that's a great answer. Yeah. So that's exactly it. It's really kind of what I alluded to earlier about a student saying, you know, I need this help, but for whatever reason, I don't want to go to the SAS office, or in this case, the student's out of state. I can't go there. So I wanted you to know that we certainly accommodate those students. We realize that we're not going to ask them to drive from Georgia or wherever it is. We have that happen. So we meet with those students either by Skype, and if we can't do it in that virtual video way, then we will do it by phone if necessary. I like to have that face-to-face contact, at least that initial time with the student, so we do try to do that. But depending on the student's technology ability, sometimes that can be a challenge. But refer them to us, that's critical. So this is another one. and that I think we've kind of touched on. Student tells you of disability after performing poorly on a test. And I'll be honest, this happens. Maybe the student has had an identified disability, but what we hear from those students often is that I thought I could do it without the accommodations. I'm in college, I'm an adult, this is a new experience, I thought I had this down, I was ready, and then they bomb their test. And so they've studied. And some of these students, you just see it, you know it, they've shared their notes, this is everything I've gone over, I spent 10 hours. So you know that they have prepped and they still haven't done well. And in those cases, you know, they're asking to retake the exam, and they've even told you, this is how the disability impacted my performance on this exam. It's all very reasonable. So what should you do? Once again, refer them to us. We will communicate, the instructor and our office. And as I said earlier, accommodations are not retroactive. So if that student comes in today and gets the accommodations next week, which is typically a turnaround time, then that student's accommodations will move forward from today. Whether or not you give that student an alternative or another opportunity to retest or something like that, that's up to you, because the student did not have accommodations prior to today. And those are conversations that we can have on an individual basis too. Key points, I think I've covered all these today. I hope I have. I think the bottom line here is, what do we do to contribute to student success and student retention, and however we go about doing that and making things more accessible to a wide range of students. I think those things all fit together. As I said earlier, they really intersect. Any other questions? I think I hit my time. Thank y'all for being here today. If you have any questions, my contact information is there. Feel free to call, email, stop by. Thank you for being here.
Let's say I do a video and I need for you guys to have an interpreter on the video.
Okay.
What kind of lead time do I need?
As much as possible. I realize that sometimes.
An hour, 15 minutes?
Let me restate that. Yeah. Preferably 2 weeks. That's really nice. That's really nice. And the other thing is if it is an online course, I know that we're working with Colt and they have opportunities to get things captioned for those types of videos. But if it is something where the student specifically needs a sign language interpreter, we will work with the faculty to make sure that those things are available to us in a timely manner so that the student has it in a timely manner. But thank you for asking that. That's a good question. Okay.
Please fill out the evaluation. That will be provided.
Thank y'all.
If you have any questions.
Thank you for your help with that.
So we sit together, we're